Good evening and welcome to Construction Management 1, lecture number 3. So what we'll do tonight is just quickly go through a few things about estimating and tendering. Just a few pointers for you guys to have a look at. Obviously there's more information in the resource material, and of course if you get stuck with any of that you can just ask a question. Alright, so for those of you guys who've been trying to find this, depending on which type of text you've got, if you've got the 1996 or the 1994 volumes, I think I've just given you the 1994 volume there. So to those of you guys who have that textbook, this is where you'll find everything about estimating and tendering. It's a number of pages there, and it makes for good reading, so you can find the information readily over there. Alright, so let's start with a quick quiz, and in this case what we'll do is we'll ask you guys a true or false question, and I'll see if I can change the polling answers to true or false. Respond to true. Okay, so let's just make true becomes yes and false becomes no. Alright, so by showing a little tick box there, what's the right answer for this one? Lump sum and unit price estimates are forms of fixed price estimates. Who wants to take a guess on that one? Alright, so Simon says yes. Mark, you also say yes. Yep, indeed it is. So that's definitely correct. I've just got 3 of these little questions over there. The bidding climate refers to the anticipated weather conditions during the duration of a project. What do you guys say about that one? Once again, true, yes, and no equals false. Alright, so yep, Simon, I see you've got a no there, or a false. I'm not sure from alright, not to worry, let's move on to the answers. It's a false in this case, and this is actually one of the questions that's from the PMP examination. If you go and write the PMP examination at some point in your life, this is one of the questions that you'll encounter there. Last night in building sector management we spoke about the professional organizations, and I'm not sure if you guys weren't there last night. Mark, I think you might have been there. But in any case, PMI, it's a big organization dealing with project management, and to become a project management professional, you actually have to go and sit a 200-question multiple choice exam. It takes forever to do, but it's not that difficult at the end. All right, so question number 3 there, that's for you guys. Talking about overheads and indirect costs. So the employee of a contractor pays $450 per month for his portion of the medical insurance. Alright, so Simon, you reckon no, it's false. Mark, you also reckon it's false. Yep, that's correct. So both of those are false. Alright, so that concludes our little questionnaire for tonight. Let's move on to the fun stuff. If I can get going there. Alright, so what we're going to look at tonight is basically the types of cost estimates. Right. So obviously in the beginning of a project very little information is available, so we don't really have a really accurate estimate. So what we do there is we go in order of magnitudes for these estimates. So early on during the startup phase of a project, let's say we're over there, idea generation is just being completed, we're sort of sitting in pre-feasibility phase. We want to know more or less what it's going to cost. Is this going to be a feasible project? So based on the information that we've got available, we can sort of expect an accuracy or inaccuracy of say between 30 and 50%. All right, then as time moves on and as we go along our line over there and we get some more information, our project grows, the scope of information or the scope of works becomes a little bit more comprehensive. We can see that we can now start going to the rough order of magnitude, and those percentages start coming down. Our inaccuracies start coming down. And as we move along towards the execution of the contract, we can see, all right, now we've got a definitive estimate. We know everything that needs to go into this project, and therefore we can allow for that. So based on that, we sort of know around that area what the total cost is going to be. Who of you guys agree with that statement? Is it possible to know upfront 100% what a project is going to cost? So just a yes or a no. Once again, if you think yes, it is possible, or if you say no, it's not possible, or alternatively, if you say a chat, yep, that's also fine. All right, so cool, thanks for that, Simon. All right, so let's try something else. There's our normal S graph for our project. So at which stage of that project is the most expensive time? Is it over here during the planning phase of the project? All right, so remember our stage gates run along this line, and over there is the value of the project. Or alternatively, is it possibly during the execution of our project? Remember, this is a normal S-curve for a project. Or is it over here when the project is actually now finished and we start commissioning it? So what's the most expensive time? So let's put a 1 over there, let's put a 2 over there, let's put a 3 over there, or if it's not any of those, let's put a 4 over there. Who wants to take a guess at where's the most expensive time on a project? And of course, you know, it's just a chat session, so if you guys want to jump in there, just hit the talk button and we'll talk about it some more. All right, so in the absence of you guys talking, I'll keep on talking. All right, so from a contractor's point of view, obviously the execution part of the project is going to be quite expensive, but from the employer's point of view, this phase over here, which doesn't really form part of the S-curve, is going to be really important, well, really expensive if we have an overrun on the project. What happens in this area over there? Well, this is where we have commissioning of the plant. This is, let's say we're going to build a gas to liquid installation. This is obviously where we're going to start producing oil or fuel or gas, and you know, that's a really expensive time. So those are interesting things that we sort of have to remember about where and when to spend the money. All right, so let's see if we can go back to our slideshow now. All right, the next slide that I want to show you is basically the opportunity for influence, and this follows on from the S-curve one that we've just seen. There's our different stage gates at the bottom again, and you can see there we've got two lines over there, a blue one and a red one. The red one is representative of the cost, and the blue one is representative of the influence. So early on in the project, it's really cheap to make changes, all right? But we don't have a lot of information available. But our opportunity to influence the project is really high. As we move along the project line, obviously, we start doing stuff, we start installing buildings, we start building plant, and now it becomes more expensive because a lot of the work has already been done. All right, so our opportunity to influence the project now goes down. All right, so it starts going down, while the cost associated with that opportunity now starts going up. All right, so we start going into an area where we say, all right, if we want to change anything after the point of detailed engineering, it's going to start costing us megabucks. All right, so that's why we always have to try and plan and make sure we keep everything as firm as possible. All right, so if we look at estimating and tendering, what are the different aspects that we have to look at? Obviously, we have to see what's behind the scenes. All right, before we call a tender, what do we need to do? We need to have a strategy in place. What is it that we're going to build? Is it going to be a designer build? We have to have an idea of our procurement strategy. Is it who's going to be our partners? Is the scope defined? Is it a cookie cutter project, or is it a first of a kind type of project that we're going to execute? So all of those questions, obviously, that we have to think about. So documentation, really, really important as a minimum. All right, so we're going to look at, as a minimum, we definitely need the scope of works. All right, so the scope sits over there. Gee, that's terrible writing. Let's see if I can get that a little bit better. Not a line, that's not what I wanted. I want a scope. And of course, you guys can all laugh at me while I'm trying to do this. But in any case, yep, so on the documentation, what we want to do is make sure that we at least have the scope or the works information. In some contracts we call it works information. Also, we might have a bill of quantities. So the bill of quantities is also really important. Once we have all the documentation ready, we can decide, is it going to be an open tender, is it going to be an invited tender, or what's the process that we're going to follow. And obviously, you know, open tenders and closed tenders have different rates of exposure, more risks associated with different ones, and obviously there's different solutions for each of those. Alright, so another thing that we have to think about is the requirements and the scope, and then of course what happens once that document just goes out onto the streets and a contractor start asking questions. How do we deal with those questions, and how do we make sure that everybody gets the same information? And typically, when you look at the questions and answers forum at in Construction Management 1, this is more or less what I want to do. If somebody sends me an email, I'll copy it into the Q&A forum, and then everybody gets the advantage of that question. And the same with site visits. All right. So what we used to do typically is we used to get all the contractors in a bus. The project manager turned into a tour guide, and he told everybody on the bus exactly what's going to happen with this big project. All right. So typically, we always had a few jokers on the bus. You know, if you wanted to influence how other contractors think, you know, as soon as you stop on site, you can ask a question along the lines of, we did a project that's down the road and we encountered a lot of hard rock. You know, is this site going to have similar conditions? And immediately you'll see people start taking notes, and obviously they'll load their tenders, and you'll be in a better position to get that. All right, so it's a little bit unethical, but that's the business that we do. All right, so why is it important for us to have accurate information? Obviously, if we make any mistakes, it's going to cost us money. So, and in this day and age, we don't really have money to throw at the problem, so we need to be really frugal in that sense. We're going to have to plan our resources, our people that's going to work on it, and then, of course, the biggest one there for me is our clients typically always have unrealistic expectations. Right? So contractors tend to be their own worst enemies. In the sense that you know, they overpromise and underdeliver. It's really easy to say yes, we can do it without actually having the capacity to do that. So that's really, really important for us to make sure we know where we're going. Obviously, if we overestimate, recently I was at an AIB meeting in Sydney, and we had about 6 or 7 of the tier 1 and 2 contractors there, and all of them just said that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get jobs. You know, if you tender, you might, in the old days, you might get 1 out of every 4 that you did. At the moment, they're looking at about 1 out of every 20 even. So it's getting more and more tight over there, and especially now that the crane has fallen over at UTS, everybody's going to jump onto that bandwagon again. So safety is going to be really difficult. I can just see all the union action that's going to be part of that as well. It's going to slow down the industry a little bit there until they get up again. Alright, so the aspects of estimates that we have to think about, there's different methodologies that we can follow. The main thing about these estimates, and I'm sure you guys have all encountered this before, is we have to make sure that we have our work breakdown structures in place. Alright, so if we think about it, so how are we going to build, or how are you going to eat an elephant? And the answer for that is it's not easy to eat an elephant, but you know, you can make sure the elephant is dead before you start eating it, otherwise it might trample you or chase you away. But once it's dead, start eating, you know, at one corner, you know, maybe a leg, and chow it like that. And that's exactly what we do with these work breakdown structures. So we break down our project into smaller pieces and we farm it out. All right, so we can either do it ourselves or we can get subcontractors to do it for us. All right, so I see Reese, you've joined us. Just making sure, can you hear us okay? Can you see everything on the screen? I can see there's a little bit of a delay. All right, so there's the yes mark. Thank you very much for that. All right, so if we look at the different methodologies that we can use, the analogous methodology, who wants to take a guess at what happens in the analogous methodology? Anyone? you're welcome to just either type it into the chat window, or alternatively you can click on the talk button and go for it. I can see Simon, you typing up an answer for us. Not even heard that word. Yeah, I struggle to pronounce it sometimes. You know, analogous. Tonight must be a good night because I'm not struggling at all. But sometimes I put the emphasis on the wrong part of the word. Do you guys also have days where you just cannot string two sentences together? And yeah, some of those days I've had quite a few of them this week. All right, so analogous is that we look at existing projects that we're working on, or previous ones that we're working on, that sort of have the same classification, same feel to it, similar projects. We've done the work before. It's almost like a cookie cutter project. We've done a few of these houses before, and therefore we know what to expect. So it's basically looking at the same thing. So analogous means the same. So parametric would be the next one up. Anybody, it's nothing to do with medicine or anything like that. Who's heard of the parametric methodology? Yes or no? Or maybe in a chat window, if you give me an idea. Alright, so Reese, you say no. Alright, so parametric has to do with statistical values and probability. So when we look at the statistical values, once again, you've all heard of the California banana curve. Let's see if I can draw the California banana curve. So once again, there is our nice S-curve, and the California banana curve looks something like this. And why do you think they call it the California banana curve? Do you think there's a specific reason for that? Or all right, so well, the main reason is it looks like a banana, and it was first coined in California, so therefore it's now called the California banana curve. So what the parametric method does is it looks at statistical upper and lower levels for a specific contract. So I'll just add our typical S-curve in there. All right, so there's our S-curve into the contract, and now what we can see there is as the project moves along, imagine this is the work and the time that we're doing on the project. There's our timeline going along, and we are spending money over here. Our contractor is spending money over here. If the contractor starts spending money like that, the line does that. So it's maybe not the best sketch that I've ever made, but you get the point. This is an area for concern for us because our contractor is now overexpending, and we need to make sure that we bring him back into control. What else might cause this to happen? What else might cause our contractor to go into a position where he's spending more than expected? And I'll give you a tip. I'll give you 3 letters on the board there. Those are the 3 letters that I can give you as a tip. Who wants to take a guess at what else can cause it? I could see Simon, you're typing up something for us. I'll just wait for that to come along. All right, so the tip there is front-end loading. All right, so typically in large infrastructure projects, you'll see many contractors will use a process that they call front-end loading, where they load up the costing for a project heavily with all the capital-intensive items. All right, so that means that they spend more than what they should. Alternatively, we can also see if these red lines represent the statistical upper and lower limits for a project of this size. Those are the lines that we expect our project to stay within. Let's say our contractor, let me see if I can grab another color there. Let's say our contractor is doing that. All right, so what do you think will cause that? It's obviously an under expenditure on the project. Our contractor is not performing as well as he should. He's running out of time. He's not spending enough money. And we'll have to talk to him to see if we can get that into line over there. So typically what we'll see in a project like that, yep, he's under-resourced definitely. So what we'll do in this green area over here, which I'm trying to show you there, is this is where we'll add some resources. All right, so obviously we'll try and throw money at the problem, and see if we can get our contractor back onto that expenditure line where we want to see him. All right, so there's our California banana curve and the parametric model. So let's see if I can go back to the slideshow. Yep, there we go. All right, so the build-up, that's an easy one. The build-up one is just, it's actually the previous slide that we were talking about. There we go. Bottom-up, build-up. Now that we know what's on the next slide, you guys know exactly what's going on. This is where we break it down and get a price for each of these items. All right, so this is typically where we use our work breakdown structure. All right, and we make sure that we break it into small little areas. All right, so there's also different things that we have to think about. The basis for our estimate, how thorough is the information that it's available. What about life cycle costing? Is it our own capital project that we're working on? Is it a client's capital project? Where's the money coming from? Should we be using tiles instead of carpets? You know, if you look at a shopping center, we know that shopping centers are roughly designed for 12 to 15 years before it gets revamped, and the same with these carpets. You know, in a clothes shop, for instance, we'll most probably find that there's carpets, but in the heavy traffic areas we'll find tiles. So those are the basic things that we have to think about. All right, so we've spoken about the analogous methodology, we've spoken about parametric, and we've spoken about the bottom-up technique. We haven't really spoken about the expert opinion. This is also called the Delphi technique, or Delphi, depending on if you're a Yank or maybe from Europe. So what we do is we basically, and we did a lot of this in the Middle East, we had a few experts around the table that's worked in the area for a long time, and we submitted information to them, gave them the scope of work. They went away on their own, came back, sat in the same room again, threw questions at each other, and then came up with a combined answer. And that group of experts then gives us an idea of what it's going to cost. All right, so there we go. That's the expert opinion, or the Delphi technique. So when we think about estimating, we obviously have to think about the philosophy that we're going to employ. All right, so what is it that we're going to build? Is it what's the project like? Is it houses? Is it commercial? Is it sheds? What class of building is it? Where is it? Is it in the middle of nowhere? Can we use fast direct structures? All of those things we have to answer before we can go on. Most importantly, can we outsource it? All right, do we have the skills to do it, or can we get somebody else to do it? So OPR, those are the letters that we have to remember. Other people's resources. All right, so if we don't have the resources ourselves, we outsource it. All right, the same goes for your assignments. All right, so if you're struggling in your group assignment with something, one of your other team members will most probably have a better solution, or a little bit of expertise on how to do it. All right, so the question is, can we outsource it? Why will we do it? And how are we going to do it? All right, so typically turnkey projects, those type of projects, those are the ones that we want to outsource, because it's specialist design and everything. It makes it difficult for us to do in-house, because we just don't have the skills. If we now start thinking about our contracting models, I might just do a little sketch over here. We've got basically 5 models, and you might not have encountered these if you haven't worked in areas of infrastructure planning or infrastructure projects. These are basic ones that's out there. The full competitive model means that we go out to the market every time. So let's see if I can grab a little sketch there. So there's our stage gate. I'm just going to do our stage gate on the screen there. All right, so the full competitive model means that, let's say this is stage 3, this is where we execute over there. All right, and this is planning. We're not going to have all the phases, and this is over here is commissioning. All right, so there's basically the phases that we've got. If we go for a full competitive model, this is where we're going to ask contractor A and contractor B to provide us with a price for the plan. Alright, once they provide us, once we decide which is the best, we'll award either the contract to A or B. But at the end of that phase, we'll go out to the market again. Alright, full competitive. Alright, so we'll add another line over there, and for that phase, we'll go out to the market again, and we'll go out to different contractors again, contractor A, B, C, D, how many also we want to do. Alright, and that's how we go on. Alright, so that one is a little bit more labor intensive from the client side, but from a cost effective point of view, it really saves money because it's fully competitive. It's a new guy every time. The big problems with a full competitive model is, let's say contractor B made a mistake in the execution of the project. When we reprice it over there for the next phase, contractor B is going to charge you to rectify his own mistake. Alright, so keep that in mind. Alright, so that's our competitive model over there. The next one is what we call a rollover. So a rollover is, once again, we have two contractors pricing against each other, A and B. They're sitting over there, they're pricing against each other. Only one of them is going to win the price, but let's say in this case, contractor A wins the price. In this time, he now rolls over the contract. Alright, so he knows that he doesn't have to worry about anybody else pricing on the same work as him again, because it's going to roll over after the completion of the first phase of the stage. He's just going to continue on working. Alright, so the project, or the problem with this one is, of course, that let's say contractor A knows that he's going to be the rollover, or he knows that it's a rollover strategy. Therefore, he loads up the second part of his contract. Right, so he adds a lot of dollars in there, and he adds a lot of dollars in there, and also he adds a lot of dollars in there. Right, so those are the things that we have to think about when we're talking about a rollover model. Alright, so we can also talk about a dual basic with competitive rollover. Alright, so this is where we once again have A and B. And at the end of A and B, we once again go out to the market. And then there's another competitive section over there. And then from that point forward, as soon as the second stage has been reached, we do a rollover. Alright, so those are the different ones that we can have. This is obviously quite expensive. The last one there is quite expensive for us, the dual basic with competitive rollover, because both the contractors is going to provide you with a complete scope of work, complete specification, works information, all of those. The last two, alliance and turnkey model, they're basically on a sketch. I would draw them exactly the same. There's our alliance and turnkey model, and this is basically where we work together with our contractors. The client and the contractor work together, and they have different alliances where they support it. The turnkey, obviously, we give the turnkey, the contractor to go over there, and the contractor will then give us the keys at the end of our project. All right, so that's a quick synopsis of the contracting models that we have. Have you guys got any questions at this time? All right, so let's just move on.
With the rollover model.
Yes, go for it.
With the rollover model, do you go back to competitive tendering like for the second part, or is it just based on their price they gave you during the planning phase?
It's just, Simon, it's just based on the price that they gave you at the planning stage. You know, once again, they'll for the second phase, they will do, you know, enhancement of the information and the enhancement of that estimate. But because it's a rollover, you know, contract, it's difficult to, you know, there's nothing to compare their price against, and that's why I said, if the contractor knows that it's going to be a rollover model, he's most probably going to try and load up his price. You know, the second part of the contract is going to see if he can load up his price for that. All right, so does that answer your question there, Simon?
Yeah, mate, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so I see, Reese, you were typing something, but I missed, I didn't see a little chat come up. So if you have any questions, just go for it, okay? All right, so the procurement strategy, that's the next thing that we have to think about, and we've spoken about one or two of these items previously. So last week, and you can see now everything is starting to get together. Last week we spoke about the different types of contracts that we had. So this week we now can say, all right, now this is where we're going to go one step further. All right, so we know what the work breakdown structure is going to be like. We know that we know what a WBS is, all right, and we also know, of course, that we have to break down our project into smaller pieces and outsource it if we need be. We can now decide, is it going to be a goods type project, is it a technology? And remember last week on one of those slides, I gave you a big slide with a little diagram that sort of looked like this, and different questions, and you can then decide on the types of contracts that you can go and select. Right? So that's what we do over there. We decide on the different types of contracts. We can choose the correct type of document that we want to support ourselves with. So the Australian standard, we can use that. Alternatively, if we're going to do some work outside the borders of Australia, we might choose one of the other European-inspired types of contracts. It's up to you. In Australia, what we see is very few off-the-shelf type contracts. It will be based on a AS contract, but each of the clients will obviously tweak it to make sure that they have it the way that they want it. We're also going to have to look at our pricing strategies. You know, how are we going to pay for it? Can we pay a lump sum for it? Or if it's a design project, can we do a design project on a lump sum? Typically not. You'll see that designers, engineers, architects, and those guys, they typically like the hourly rates because they just don't know exactly how long it's going to take. So reimbursable, that's the going one for anything professional. And then of course, once we have that in place, we now can decide, are we going to go out for competitive bidding, or are we going to go with a sole source? All right, so when we talk about a sole source, obviously this is the one where there's only one specific contractor that can supply it for us, or alternatively there might only be one contractor that we want to work with. All right, so those two types of sole source there, we'll talk about that some more in a little bit. Pre-selected, all right, so this is where we have, let's say 5 or 6 contractors that we've worked with before. We know that they perform adequately, and therefore we're happy with their work, and we can select them to do the work for us or come and bid on that price for us. Now, a company like Telstra and Westfield and those guys, they might have a whole list of different companies available on their pre-selection list, and some might be for brickwork, some might be electricians, some might be for plumbing, and depending on the type and the scope of the work, they'll make the selection based on what's on that register. All right, and then of course, we have to make sure that we have a bidders list for each of the contracts that we go out onto, so that's just a little bit admin. Now these projects do become admin heavy at some point. And then a risk register, that's always a good thing to have. Some of the contracts like FIDIC and the NEC actually requires a risk register at the point where you sign the contract, and this is to make sure that you have addressed all the risks successfully. So if there's a risk in the risk register, so let's say this is our risk register over there. If there's a risk over there, on the next page we need to have a solution, or we need to pass it on to somebody else. All right, so who is going to take that risk for us? So those are the questions that we have to think about in terms of our risk register. For our procurement management plan, the scope needs to be well defined. We need to understand what goes into the scope. After we know what's in the scope and the works information, we can move on and see if we can develop and issue that invitation to bid. All right, so the invitation to bid has got a few names. All right, so there's request for quotation, there's invitation to bid, there's a request for a price. Let's see if I'm reading fast. So there we go, request for a price. All of those things are basically the same. What's the difference between a bid and a tender? There's no real difference between it. It's just if you're on the north side or on the south side of the river, it's exactly the same thing. The bid clarification and evaluation, we'll talk about that some more just now, but this is something that I touched on earlier tonight. Remember when we said we share the information between everybody, make sure that everybody's got the same information. How are you going to deal with the bid clarification issues? Are you going to call everybody into the same room? Are you going to allow the contractors to ask you questions individually? And obviously, if it's a straightforward type project, it's less important. But let's say you're building a power station. Right? In terms of power station, many millions of dollars. Obviously, we need to be really transparent with all of these things. What happens in terms of the award of the contract? What happens if the wheels fall off? And some of you guys might have already answered that question in the assessment items. All right, then of course, important things, when do we start the project? So there's our timeline, there's our start date, there's our completion date. What happens in the middle, that is dependent on what the scope is and of course our contractor. All right, so guarantees, we'll talk about those some more. All right, so you've seen this one before, the bidding process. I'm not going to go through this again. I think we spoke about this in the first lecture, so if you need a little bit of information on that one, please refer back to that. But basically, this is an idea of a bidding process. This isn't one that's professed to be the best. This is just an example of a typical bidding process. All right. So already I can see in the Australian market at the present time, we won't have 5 to 7 contractors. All right, so the economy is a little bit down at the moment, so most probably we're going to sit with a maximum of 4 over there, and we might only have 2 people over there that we're going to deal with as prospective contractors. All right, so that goes through the motions, and then of course we do our decision analysis, and this was the base for one of the questions previously. And we reach our point where we say, all right, this is now our preferred contractor. Let's say at this point, at contract negotiations or maybe even at the pre-award meeting, the negotiations fall over. What is your fallback position? Well, typically what you'll do is you'll fall back to this point over here where we say, all right, we still have 2 contractors in line. We haven't awarded the contract yet, but we still have a fallback position. Number 2 is maybe not as well situated as number 1, but we can still fall back to that position. All right, and that's basically what I wanted for that question. So we'll see what you guys got. The next step, let's say now we've gone through the process, the negotiations have been successfully completed. We have to get the contract signed, make sure that it's on paper. Who of you guys have worked on projects where the contracts were not signed before you started? Just a yes or a no. Who's worked on a project where there was no contract? All right, so yes, Simon, you've worked on Reese, you as well. I mean, it's at the order of the day. I've worked, and surely in my life, on I would say 90% of the projects that I've worked on had no contracts for at least the first 2 or 3 months. But they sort of pick up after a while. The key thing is, getting started. What about a letter of intent? Who's worked on a project where you have a letter of intent, a LOI? Who's worked with projects where that's happened? All right, so yes, Simon, you've worked on that one as well. Reese, you haven't. We had quite a bit of trouble with the LOIs because in terms of the legal system, it doesn't create a contract. It's like being almost pregnant, and that created a lot of problem for our risk management department for the company that I worked with, Worley Parsons, at that stage. So we stopped working on the letter of intent at all, so we wouldn't really just wouldn't take the risk anymore. You have to have a formal contract signed and in place. For this to be in place, obviously if you go for an Australian standard, it might be different to let's say the NEC or even a contract like FIDIC. All of these items to be submitted will be different. and you'll need to make sure that you study the contract type that you're going to use. A little bit on contract administration. In my experience, I think the most important thing on these contracts is two-way communication. It's the same with you guys. Who's married, or who's got a girlfriend or a partner? Show of hands, yes or no. I'm single at the moment, so there we go. Anybody? Yep. All right. So, what happens when you stop talking to your girlfriend, partner, wife? Well, and soon, if you stop talking, there's a gradual breakdown of the relationship, and yeah, you become. I didn't read that, Matthew, but yes, eventually there will be a suspension of services. Yes, those types of services, and then you'll have to fix that up, or go elsewhere, maybe get another contractor in to help you out with that. So yes, clear communication must be one of the most important things for me on these contracts. All right, so when we think about the estimating and the planning of our project, what do we have to think about? The factors that we have to consider, basically the complexity. What's easier, a $50 million golf estate or a $50 million power plant? All right, so obviously the power plant might be a little bit more intricate. It's a lot less space that you have to play in. It might be a brownfields project. And of course, the same goes for the golfing estate. It might be a difficult estate. You have to think about the complexity. So the size in monetary value doesn't really have an indication of the complexity. Right, so these two items actually, they go hand in hand. So let's see if I can do that. These two go hand in hand, and it's really difficult to make these choices up early because you need to make those decisions. Time constraints, self-imposed constraints, and budget limits, those are always a problem for us. Don't fall into that area where you just say, yes, I can do it, or no, this won't cost a lot of money. Is there something like a small project? Not really. If you really think about it, even a small project has exactly the same amount of admin. You still have to go through the transparency. You still have to do all the admin associated with all of the different stages that you have to go through. And then, of course, the quality that's implied by our works information, or the scope of our project. We need to make sure that we stay on top of managing the quality. From our client's perspective, there's a few things that he wants to know about in terms of the project and the contractor that he's going to have working with him. What's the experience? Has there been similar projects? If it's a house that you're going to build, have you done many of the same type of designs? If this is a double-story or a three-story house, has it got concrete slabs? Is it suspended? Is it built up? All of those questions, have you done it before? And those are the questions that typically the buyer will ask. Possibly in larger contracts, there will also be questions about the professional team. Who's going to be the civil engineer? Who's going to be the designers? Are we going to have architects or building designers on there? If we're going to have architects, maybe we can swap them out for building designers. And then, of course, the management capabilities and the legal knowledge associated with the execution of the projects. So you want somebody there, your CA, your contract administrator, needs to be reasonably switched on. Otherwise, it's like playing chess. Right? If you make bad moves, it sort of catches up to you later, and you have to pay for that at some stage. All right, so the required result for our bidding phase, or this whole estimation process, is, of course, from the client's perspective, he wants to see the lowest price. Money makes the world go round, and unfortunately, that's always going to be a driver. So, and in the 3 bullet points there, I've got cost, time, and quality. So those are the 3, and you remember that those 3, if you think about it, they always sit in a little ball like that or a triangle like that. So we've got cost over there, and we've got time over there, and we've got quality over there. Now imagine that you've got a sort of a thing there in the middle, and there's a suspension wire coming from each of those corners there. So you have to use a lot of imagination with my sketches tonight. So let's say, for instance, you are going to start skimping on quality. Right? What's going to happen is our little centerpiece is going to start moving away from the quality, and of course it's going to start skewing the project. And so try and keep the ball in the middle. Not really easy. Something typically has to give on a project, and typically it's going to be the quality issues, because quality isn't necessarily seen immediately. Those latent defects only come out later on, latent and patent defects. Alright, so those are the things that we have to think about from our project point of view. Lowest possible risk. Make sure that the risk is assigned to the party that's best suited to handle it. Alright, so I've given you this example before. Let's say there's a change in the law. The law changes to say that we are no longer allowed to work on Fridays. Alright, who is going to be best suited to take the risk for that? Is it the client or is it the contractor? Alright, so those, you have to assign the risk to the party that's best suited. So in this case, let's say changes, we're not allowed to work on Friday. That's a risk that the contractor could not have foreseen, therefore the client has to take that risk. Let's say there's another risk. There's rock on the, we find while excavating on site, we find extremely hard rock, and now we need explosives to clear the site. That's typical risk that's associated with our contractor. Depending on who, who supplied the geological survey. Also, in recent months, I've come across what the contractors call, or the clients call, or refer to as relied upon information. Right, and this is typically where you have an old site for a power station or a plant, and the drawings are not up to date, so even the clients don't know exactly what kind of services are underneath their plants. So when you go into this brownfield site to do work, you encounter services that you were not expecting, and obviously the client from his side is going to say, all right, relied upon information determines that you take responsibility for that once you move on to site. All right, so always make sure that you know exactly who you're going to get into bed with before you actually get into bed with. And if you're going to get into bed, make sure that you've got the necessary protection. All right. And we protect ourselves in terms of contracting risks with contracts. All right, so the bidding solicitation, or the strategy that we can go out with, we can negotiate with a single seller. Alternatively, we can go with a few of them. We can select them from a list, or we can pre-qualify and say, all right, we've pre-qualified you based on the previous work that you've done with us, and therefore you guys can now come and submit a price for us. Open bids, all right, so this is the one that we put in the Sunday newspaper. It goes out to everybody, and we invite anybody to come and respond to that. All right, so really costly. At some point in my life when I was working for a small contracting firm, whenever we needed scrap paper in the office, we would go through the newspaper and find out where the open bids are. Then we would go and collect the tender documents, and we'd use the back of the tender documents to be scrap paper in the office. So obviously the clients caught on to that, because now they start charging you a deposit for those documents. Alright, so previously we spoke about sole source, and I remember I mentioned that there's two types, the proprietary and a single source. Right, so who wants to take a guess? What's the difference between proprietary and a single source? Who wants to take a guess? What's the difference between proprietary and a single source? Anyone? Oh, I can see. Yep. Oh, yeah, Mark. Yeah. Sometimes these things we tend to forget them really easily. Yeah. So the difference is a single source is there's only one. All right, so let's say for instance you want to install a SAP enterprise resource planning system into your big organization. You can only buy the SAP system from SAP, so there's only one single source that's available for that. Proprietary source, something like tools, for instance, Honeywell. Right, Honeywell would be a proprietary source because they license it out to somebody else to supply it locally in Australia, and therefore we have to go through that proprietary source. All right, so that's typically proprietary refers to licensing agreements that we've got. All right, so interesting things. That's basically what I wanted to talk about tonight. Who of you guys have got any questions? Any questions from anyone? That must be my best happy face for the night. Thanks, thanks Reese, thanks Mark. As I said earlier on, you guys weren't here yet. I think I was speaking to Simon. I will try my best to have the results out by the weekend. I'll see if I can get all of that done tomorrow and Friday, and then I'll post it so that you guys can start working on the next one. Show of hands, who's already started working on the workbook? Just give me a yes or a no. Alright, so Mark, you've worked on the... Alright, Reese, you haven't started yet. Matthew, you haven't started yet. And Simon, you have your hand up. Would you like to answer a question or ask a question? Alright, so you just read them over. Alright, so I'm thinking about... Alright, so only Simon has started. Alright, so I'm thinking about maybe reducing the workbook items, and I'll most probably make a decision based on the feedback from the assessment items. So I'll give you guys Monday. I'll do a posting Monday on the news forum to say yes or no. I'm just thinking about it because we are doing a lot of work. Those weekly posts that we do, they do tend to take a lot of time as well, but I think I for one enjoy the weekly posts a lot more than the workbook. Which ones are you most likely to remove? Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. Yeah. It might be a little bit unfair for me to take them out now, but I actually hope nobody had started them. So let me just go to our workbook and see if I can find it. Alright, so it's just A3, yep, there we go. Alright, so A3, that one's definitely staying in there. That's the A3, okay, so maybe I've got the wrong course. So assignment number 1, you guys already submitted that one. Assignment number 2 deals with the different types of theory. I've got the wrong tag here. Alright, so note to self, always make sure that you pick up the right course profile for the course. Alright, so question, assignment number 1, you guys have already submitted that one. Alright, so that's out of the way. Assignment number 2 deals with our weekly posts. Alright, so that's the one that we do weekly, so we're quite happy with that. That continues. Assignment number 3 is the workbook. Alright, so there we have 7 different activities that we have to complete. They're really small. There's only 800, 250, 250. So what I think I might do is not to inconvenience or disadvantage anybody. Let's keep the workbook in for now. And for the next offerings of courses that you guys will do with me, I'll make sure that we don't have a workbook in there. All right, so how's that? Yes. All right, so we keep it as it is, and yeah, we'll just handle it next time. All right, so if you guys don't have any other questions, we might call it a night. Just spot on time, just on my, it's just on 9 o'clock in New South Wales, just on 8 o'clock in Queensland, so not a bad night. For next week, we don't have a lecture. The next one is only going to be, I think, on the 12th. So if you have any questions that you want me to talk about, if you guys can give me an indication of what you want me to handle in the next session, and I'll definitely work it in. All right. Great stuff. All right, so I'll see you guys next time.